working in philanthropy and then getting involved in issues of harmful speech and fighting pornography, and eventually moving into anti-trafficking work. And she was really at the fore of the effort to pass the Trafficking Victims Protection Act. She has her JD from the San Francisco Law School and the DePaul College of Law. So where she has a lot of education, a lot of experience, and really, having been there and seen her work on helping to pass the TVPA, I can just tell you she was a really phenomenal force and was really critical in bringing this issue to Congress and making sure they understood the severity and seriousness of the human trafficking issue. She's also spent some time at the U.S. Department of State, where she worked both in the Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons, and later where she worked for the Undersecretary of State for the Undersecretary of State for Democracy and Global Affairs, who at that time was Paula Dobriansky. So Laura's work on anti-trafficking has taken her around the world. She's been to very many countries, and in my years of knowing her, I never ceased to be impressed with her forward thinking and kind of always picking out the new niche areas and new areas of where we should be concerned in our efforts to combat trafficking. And I think this presentation today is yet another example of Laura's leading and forward thinking on this issue. I haven't seen this presentation before. I think it's wonderful, and I think you'll be really excited as Laura shares this information. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to my mentor and my friend and really an anti-trafficking hero, Dr. Laura Lederer. Laura, the presentation is yours.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I should say that all of the work I've done over my career, I have categorized as work against commercial sexual exploitation of women and children, whatever sort of aspect it's taken. Even the hate speech was a part of that work, the work on hate speech. So I don't know whether we will be able to have a question and answer as we go along, Lisa, but I wanted to make this as informal as possible, because I think this is a cutting edge issue, and there probably are some people online who know more about some aspects of this, a link between human trafficking and street gangs. And so please do jump in and ask your questions, and Lisa can forward them to me. And if there's something that is confusing, we can answer it right away, or we can hold and have the rest of the questions at the end.
Yes, sorry, Laura. Yeah, I'm sorry I forgot to mention that. People can you can type in a message if you have a question during the presentation, and then I will interject with that, and Laura can try to answer whatever question that is. So we do, as Laura said, we want to make this as interactive as possible, so feel free to type in your questions as we go along.
It's just consider it a virtual roundtable. So this work, just by way of background, after I left the State Department, I had been concerned for quite a while, along with a number of other experts and advocates, that not enough was being done on the demand side of human trafficking. We worked a lot on the supply side, which is actually the people themselves who are the commodities that are being trafficked. You know, rescue, restore, building shelters, comprehensive sets of services for them. We worked a lot on the distribution end of the triangle, which is investigation, arrest, prosecution, conviction. And what we had not done was look at the demand side of the triangle of activity. And Global Centurion was formed to address the demand side. So the first slides are a little bit of background on how I came to be working on human trafficking and street gangs. It actually emerged from our Anchor research project, which when I left the State Department, I began. It's an international human trafficking case law database. We have a lot of information that is anecdotal. We have a lot of information that is extrapolative. In other words, we're extrapolating stats from from cases, but we're at the point now where we really need to be collecting uh, every bit of information from real cases. And the time I spent in the State Department over, I guess it's now 11 annual reports, TIP reports that have come out. And those TIP reports indicate that there are somewhere between 10,000 and 20,000 cases worldwide that have been brought to the courts. So where there's been an investigation, an arrest, a prosecution, and then either conviction, dismissal, acquittal, whatever happens. And so what Global Centurion is doing is collecting all the case law worldwide. Not cases or stories, but case law that's come to the courts. And each case, 60 data points per case, that will give us worldwide data on crime, on the crime itself, on the perpetrator, on the victim. We will, for the first time, have evidence-based information that will help us create perpetrator profiles. It'll be a searchable relational database. It's a huge undertaking, but it's something I feel that at 10 years into this, we really need to be doing this. So this is what I plunged into after I left the State Department, and my students began collecting cases, and we now have about 6,000 of those cases, and we're in the process of coding and getting them ready. So here it says about 20,000 cases, cases meaning investigation, arrest, prosecution, conviction. And although this is self-reporting by the nation states, and so it's uneven to a certain extent, it's a start. And we will be able also to go not just to the TIP report, but also to other sources for these cases that have come to the courts worldwide. So this is a view of what the database is going to look like, where we're getting our material, the data sources. Some of it's open source and some of it is not open source. Goes into the database, and we're going to be able to standardize this material and create a series of reports and maps and tables and graphs. And it's not something you can slap together. It's going to take years to get it done, but we're in the process of doing it. So it was in the collection of this data worldwide, and typing the cases and doing some of the coding, and these are only 4 of the data points that we're recording. It was in this last one. We're doing the type of case. In other words, is it child sex tourism? Is it sex trafficking? Is it labor trafficking? We're using the forms of trafficking that have been outlined, generally speaking, by the State Department, but also adding a couple that the UN recognizes, like organ trafficking. Recruitment methods, means of coercion. We're doing victim profiles, so we're looking at age and sex and education and everything else that we can get on the victim, which surprisingly you can get a lot on victims in other countries. Here in our country, we protect that information, but in other countries that information is available to a great extent. On the perpetrator, it's kind of reversed. We publish, once we've convicted, we publish pictures and names and a lot of information on the perpetrator, and in other countries that information is oftentimes hidden, which is unusual, or odd to us. But it was in the collection of the perpetrator data, and again, age and sex and all of the other kinds of nationality, place of residence, education level, everything that we can get on that person, that we began to see that there was a pattern. And there were other patterns that were emerging too. For instance, in means of coercion, we saw in Africa that voodoo is used as a means of coercion. So there are these things that start to pop out at you as you're coding this data. And it was in the coding of perpetrator profile data that we began to see street gangs. membership in street gangs emerge as one of the interesting things that about a perpetrator. And so we added we actually added a data point for that. So that is how we began to look at these cases. And because I don't want to wait until all of this data is collected and analyzed, and which could be 3-4 years down the way, we've decided to take discrete subsections of the data and began to to work with it, and that's how we came to this street gangs and human trafficking. We did first the cases in the U.S. And we're now looking at street gangs all around the world, and then we're also looking at motorcycle gangs and at prison gangs, and finding that there's involvement in trafficking there too. So I hope that this will be useful to those who are on the ground. When I presented this recently down in Texas, a young woman who ran a shelter came up to me and said, you know, we all need to know about this, because if the victim that we have, that we're giving food, clothing, shelter, emergency medical services to, has actually been trafficked by a street gang, and some of them are quite violent, this is something that is really important for us to be on the lookout for. So this information is, I've always looked at this research as applied research, research that will, as quickly as we can, get out to you know, those who are at work on this, so that they can incorporate it or utilize it in whatever way possible. So here I go. I'm just going to the most recent, which was April 2011. Department of Justice, it was a special report that the Department of Justice just published on characteristics of human trafficking in the U.S. And for those of you who are interested in actually accessing the reports themselves or the cases, you know, just let Lisa know, and I can give you the, I don't have it here in the slideshow, but I can give you the sites and the links to these reports. So in this most recent report from 2008 to 2010, those of you who are working on this issue know that by law now, the Justice Department is mandated to keep track of its stats, of some specific stats on the cases in the U.S. And so federal task forces are reporting that they've opened 2,515 suspected incidents of human trafficking between January 2008 and June 2010, which is an exponential increase, which is, and not all of those will turn into cases, but they are law enforcement incidents. And so that means that the Department of Justice is really doing its job, and also that their task forces are working. 8 in 10 of those cases were classified as sex trafficking cases, which I think for those of us who are working on this is probably not surprising. 1 in 10 were labor trafficking. This is in the U.S. only, by the way. 4/5 of the victims in these sex trafficking incidents were U.S. citizens, which is an almost shocking stat that confirms what some organizations have been saying, that we have our own homegrown trafficking of women and children in the United States, and that we need to address that. Let's see. I did a map myself, because the DOJ has not done its own map, and you'll see it's done a map of gang-related investigations and arrests, but it has not yet done a human trafficking map for the United States. And actually, this map, my students are working right now on adding those 2,000 investigations to the map, and as soon as those are done, we can put them up. But some of those are going to be difficult to find. But in any event, you can see that the legend is from bottom up. The green square is 2004 and before. The cross is 2005. The circle is 2006. The star is 2007, and the triangles are 2008 to 2009, and you can see that there's an increase again in the number of cases that have been investigated and prosecuted, and then I expect this map to just be covered as soon as we can get the rest of those in there. But I do that to sort of compare and contrast the work that's being done on human trafficking with the work that the federal government is also doing on gangs. Here you find the U.S. Department of Justice National Gang Threat Assessment of 2009. It's a big report, and again, I can get the link to that for anybody who can't find it on the DOJ website. It's a little, it's a little bit hidden. Approximately 1 million gang members belonging to more than 20,000 gangs criminally active in the United States. Criminal gangs commit 80% of crime in communities, according to reports from the communities themselves. 58% of state and local law enforcement agencies report that criminal gangs were active in their jurisdiction in 2008, compared with 45% in 2004. So it's, even though a lot is being done to address criminal gang activity, it still seems to be on the increase. Other key findings, typical gang-related crimes include alien smuggling, armed robbery, assault, auto theft, drug trafficking, extortion, fraud, home invasions, identity theft, murder, and weapons trafficking. When we first looked at this threat assessment, we were astonished to see that the phrase human trafficking was missing. There just was not the radar in the gang task forces for the either sex trafficking or labor trafficking. And my own my instinct, having been in government for 8 years, is that we have two premier programs that have been developed. One on human trafficking with the TVPA and the reauthorizations and all of the agencies that play a vital role in the U.S. government agencies that play a vital role in addressing human trafficking. And another pillar that's sort of sitting parallel to it, going on gang threat assessment and gang prevention and gang investigations and prosecutions and convictions. So those two have sort of developed separately, kind of as parallel pillars without any interaction between the two. And the other thing to note is that the gangs are involved in really egregious criminal activity. I mean, murder and weapons trafficking and drug trafficking and so on and so forth. And so for the most part, what is happening is that those cases, when they come to the courts, the charges are these charges here that you see. And it's not that human trafficking is not going on, as you'll see. It's just that it isn't being charged. So the other two findings were that they're gangs are primary retail level distributors of most illicit drugs, and that gangs are increasingly sophisticated and well organized. And that's something that I think is key to this, to the link between human trafficking and street gangs, because in earlier days we thought of street gangs as sort of a loose group of thugs, basically kids, kind of high schoolers or teens or early 20s that were kind of just palling around together doing not so nice stuff. But truly these gangs are becoming more and more sophisticated. They're very sophisticated in their methods of operation, and so we can't think of them as kind of the phrase street gangs belies what we're what we're facing. So here is the gang arrest, and I've asked DOJ if they would create a similar map for, I mean, actually exactly like this would be good, so that we could sort of lay over trafficking arrests over gang arrests now that we have so many of new trafficking cases. But you can see that there is a huge amount of criminal gang activity all across the United States. And I think if we had a similar map for the U.S., we would be able to see that there's just as much human trafficking as there is gang activity, and the two cross over. The U.S. Department of Justice has a list of about 200 U.S.-based street gangs, and I've put some of them down here for the purposes of this slideshow. I took the kind of top 10 gangs that everyone has either heard of or that have been in the news, but also that as we began to look into this, as we pulled these cases out, we began to see that they had involvement in human trafficking. So here are the top 10 street gangs in the U.S. There may be a couple of others. I'm in the process of writing a law review article, and there we're looking at 18 gangs that the Justice Department identifies as the sort of the most active in the U.S. But here are the top 10: the Crips, Bloods, Latin Kings, Gangster Disciples, Texas Syndicate, Nuestra Familia, Mexican Mafia, MS-13, Aryan Brotherhood, and Asian Watching. And as you can see there, it's you know, sort of equal opportunity criminal activity. There's no one particular type or race or ethnic background that is more involved in this or less. What I've done is a very quick background on each of these gangs, and then to take a look at some of the cases that we have uncovered. So this is the Crips. Years active 1969 to present. Territory U.S. and Canada. Ethnicity mainly African American. Membership about 300,000 in the U.S. And they have a rivalry with the Bloods. And the criminal activities that they've mostly been prosecuted for are drug trafficking, robbery, extortion, murder, burglary, and identity theft. But we found cases of prostitution, child prostitution, pimping, pandering, procuring, and as many of you know, there's forced fraud or coercion, or if there is in the trafficking into prostitution, or if there is, in the case of child prostitution, it's per se trafficking. So they are involved in human trafficking. This is one case, a very recent case in San Diego, where 36 Crips street gang members and 2 motel owners were indicted for running an online prostitution ring that targeted underage girls. They were using social networking sites, including MySpace and Craigslist and Twitter and Facebook, to recruit and to sell. And the indictment alleges that several former rival factions worked together to recruit by targeting underage girls from Brooklyn homes. And we can talk a little bit more about what that recruiting process looks like. Here's the second gang, the Bloods. They've been active since 1972. They are nationwide, active nationwide, 7,000 to 30,000 in 123 cities in 33 states. Mostly they've been prosecuted for murder, drug trafficking, robbery, and extortion, but we found cases of underage prostitution, pimping, pandering, and sex trafficking. And this is one of the recent cases. Brooklyn prosecutors arrested gang members on charges of running a sex trafficking ring that recruited girls from junior high school as young as 15. They were routinely beaten and deprived of food if they didn't earn $500 a day selling their bodies. And we'll look a little bit at also at the kind of money that these gangs are bringing in. Latin Kings, I'm going to go quickly through some of these. Active since 1940, large territory all over the U.S., but also in Europe and Central and South America. Mexican and Puerto Rican membership. They have the Chicago faction, which is alone, which is 20,000, 35,000 members. And they've been mostly prosecuted for racketeering, assault, arms trafficking, drug trafficking, extortion, identity and document forgery, robbery, and murder. We found cases such as this one of prostitution rings that were led by, here is one of the D.C. area Latin Kings, pleaded guilty to racketeering charges. And again, sometimes the sex trafficking rings are hidden by the kind of charges that are being brought, and you have to dig a little deeper into the interviews or into some of the background materials in order to find out more about what their involvement is. This is the Gangster Disciples, started in the 1960s, nationwide, mostly African American, 25,000 to 55,000. Criminal activities, drug trafficking, robbery, extortion, murder, but also prostitution, pimping, pandering, procuring, and sex trafficking. And in 2008, a joint law enforcement operation in Spokane, Washington, busted members and associates of the Gangster Disciples. 40 federal criminal charges against the gang members, including charges of coercing juvenile females to engage in prostitution. So it's that sex trafficking. I mean, depending, the charges look one way, but that is a clear case of sex trafficking. Here's another Gangster Disciple case in Palm Beach, Florida in 2010. 10 members of Gangster Disciples were arrested on racketeering charges. And what that meant was they had a total of 269. They had been arrested 269 times, 119 criminal convictions, and those convictions included drug-related arrests, firearms offenses, extortion, car theft, and prostitution. This is the Texas Syndicate that's been in operation since 1962, Mexican American and white membership. And you can see again the same thing. The prosecutions are in black, but the cases we found are in red. And I don't have a case right now, but I think there's one a little further on. This is Nuestra Familia, and again, Northern California and Central California, 1968. Some of these groups go way back, and I assume that if we went back in the records, we would find sex trafficking cases. The work that I'm doing goes back as far as 1995. It probably is not going to go back further than that. But we did find this, again, prostitution protection rackets, pimping, pandering, procuring. And this is one of the cases. He directed from inside the prison all the gang activities, and when he was interviewed, and this interview is available on 60 Minutes, you can actually hear the whole thing. He says, what kind of crimes were you involved in? And murder, money laundering, bank robberies, armored car robberies, drug deals, and prostitution is what he said, Epi Cortina. Mexican Mafia, its territory is California, Arizona, Texas, and all the prisons. It's mainly Latino, mainly Mexican American. Murder, money laundering, weapons trafficking, drug trafficking, extortion, illegal gambling, but also kidnapping, pimping, pandering, procuring, prostitution. And here is a case, 2009-2010, of arrests in Abilene, Texas, San Antonio, Texas, and San Angelo, Texas. Dismantling the Mexican Mafia gang for trafficking in drugs, assassination, robbery, and prostitution rings. and I believe that a clique that's involved with it, there's sometimes sort of sub-gangs that take a different name, the Drew Street clique, which is connected to Mexican mafia. If you remember the case of the freezer truck in Imperial, California, where 26, I believe they were mostly Mexicans, were trapped inside the freezer truck. This was the gang that was responsible for that case, and they had trafficked at least 200 people per year before they were caught. Aryan Brotherhood, active since the 1980s, ethnicity mainly white, criminal activities, drug trafficking, arms trafficking, extortion, murder for hire, inmate prostitution, and they run an extensive inmate prostitution ring, which has force and coercion in it, for sure. And here is there's an interview with John Arthur Clarke where he describes his involvement with narcotics, prostitution, and other illegal activities after his arrest in Lubbock, Texas. MS-13, those of you who are, I don't know whether Tina Front is on the webinar. I was asking to see who is listening and participating, but we have had in Virginia at least a dozen cases of MS-13 involvement in human trafficking, particularly sex trafficking, in the past couple of years. They have been active since the 1980s. Their territory is Central America and North America, mainly Latino ethnicity, 70,000 membership. And I have a few of the cases. Alexander Rivas, also known as Casper of Alexandria, was sentenced in February of this year to 1 year in jail, not very long. I think it was because he had just turned 18 when he was, when he was arrested, for running an underage prostitution ring in Woodbridge, Fairfax, Alexandria, and Maryland. He had a whole circuit that he ran. Clients paid $50, and on an average weekend night, his girls serviced, quote unquote, about 100 clients, 9 per night on weekdays. And his market, which I think is an important question for all of our trafficking cases, was illegal immigrants and construction workers and day laborers and others. He would bring these young women and girls around to them and make he made the rounds of the places where they hung out and then made his private deals. Here's another case. Jose Ciro Juarez Santa Maria, 24 years old. He's Salvadoran. Was convicted in Virginia in July of this year for sex trafficking of a 12-year-old minor. He met her at a party after she ran away from home. He offered her a place to stay, and the next day he began prostituting her out. And this is a really gruesome case. He charged $40 for her to perform 15 minutes of sex acts, and he had a similar circuit, D.C., Virginia, and Maryland. Another MS-13 case in 2010 in New York. 95 members of MS-13 were arrested, and there were a variety of charges, including assault, criminal sale of marijuana, criminal possession of a weapon, gang assault, sexual misconduct, and promoting prostitution. And I don't know what's happening with this case, whether they were deported or whether they were tried, and so I need to look to see what happened with this case. Here's another trafficking case that goes back to 2005, and as we discovered these cases in 2009, 10, and 11, we went back, and then we were able to uncover over 200 cases in the U.S. In the last 10 years. So here ICE arrests 14 members of MS-13 on multiple charges, including narcotics trafficking, but also conspiracy to distribute false documents, document tampering, and money laundering. So they were involved in in at least peripherally in the trafficking with the document tampering, which is a new charge. Another case in 2003 in Boston, Massachusetts, police arrested 20 gang members connected to MS-13 for drug trafficking, but also for prostitution of minors, procuring for prostitution, sexual assault, and rape. And in this particular case, there were rapes of deaf girls and teenagers in addition. There are at least a dozen more MS-13 cases. They're very active in sex trafficking now. Last two, I think, 18th Street Gang, 1959 to the present, and the territory is mainly Southern California, 30,000 to 50,000 nationwide membership, and again, involved in identity and document forgery and fraud, human trafficking, pimping, pandering, and procuring. They are running illegal casitas in Los Angeles. This is one of the arrests. They closed this casita down and arrested 27 members for firearms, drug, immigration charges. But there was also this was a picture taken by the police before the raid over here on the right, and then after the raid. I put this. I'm beginning to move into international gangs, but this international gang is it does operate in the U.S. as well as in Hong Kong, Los Angeles, as well as in Hong Kong and in and perhaps in China too. 7,000 membership, and they run prostitution, pimping, pandering, procuring, document fraud, and human trafficking rings in Los Angeles and San Francisco. And there was a recent arrest for I guess not so recent, 2002, arrested for running a prostitution ring and robbing competitor brothels. One of in one of the cases that I don't have enough time to talk about all the details, but in one of the cases in Virginia, the young woman who, actually girl who is now in one of the shelters in Courtney's house, said that she was often asked to set the Johns up. In other words, to go in, perform the sex act, collect the money, and then they would go in afterwards and rob him of everything else he had, rings and jewelry and any other money he had. So they made more than just the money that they on the prostitution ring. They often were also robbing at the same time. I'm going to go quickly through these, but Lisa tells me that this will be archived, and so you'll be able to get all of these slides. You'll be able to access them. But I wanted to show that there have been arrests as far back as 1996, 97, 98, 99. Quite a few arrests. Here's one, gangs turn to street prostitution of young girls. 1,058 women aged 16 to 20 associated with gangs arrested in 1997, and then they're showing that it's growing from 1996. So this has been going on for quite a while, but we're only just, because of the TVPA and the work that's being done on human trafficking and the federal task forces, we're beginning to be able to make the link between the street gangs and human trafficking. Again, on the West Coast, another operation that here, this map shows the types of gangs that are involved, and I think this might have been the earlier case I referred to. Another case in Seattle, Washington, members of the West Side street mob in Seattle, Washington, plead guilty to running a prostitution ring, which included girls as young as 15 years old. And they pimped out these girls and then took all of their earnings. And again, here's another case in Los Angeles, 2 more cases in Los Angeles, a case in San Diego. I think this is of the Oceanside. These are the 200 cases that we found as we built our case law database of street gangs involved in human trafficking. Oftentimes, the charges were not human trafficking or even prostitution, pimping, procuring, but there was a reference to the running of a ring in the in the either the trial or in the indictment or in the arrest records. And so we know we at least have a link. We need to do a lot more research to find out exactly how this operates. And this, as one of my colleagues in the Department of Justice was saying, we have almost no understanding of how this works. So Global Centurion is beginning to sort out the different recruitment methods, transportation, harboring, the marketing and retail methods. And while we're on the front end of this, we at least are getting some idea, both from the interviews that are being done by those who are offering the shelter and services to these young women and children, but also from the arrest records and the indictments and the case law itself. So the main recruiting methods on the left are the Romeo technique, which I think most of us who are involved in human trafficking work know, is somebody who's sent out from the street gang to romance, basically, a young girl, and they're getting younger and younger. I was told by Courtney's House that some of the cases involved children as young who were recruited when they were as young as 9 and 10 years old, even before middle school, when they were still in elementary school. And they're not exactly recruited into the gang. They're romanced. They're invited to what's called skip parties in middle school, skip school and come to a party at a private house, hang out. They're showered with clothes and jewelry, and they're given drugs and alcohol, and then they have a sort of rite of passage or an initiation into the gang life, which is to not just to sleep with the original person who is their quote-unquote boyfriend, but to be passed around to other gang members. And this passing around is not just a rite of passage or a gang initiation, but it's also a seasoning that takes place to move them then out onto the street. So they're asked for a love donation. They're asked to share sex with other gang members, and then they're put out onto the street. And then if they protest in 4 or 5 of these cases, and I do have all the case material, write-ups on the cases if anybody is interested, then they're beaten, then they're raped, then they're threatened, and all of the other kinds of coercion methods that can be used. The marketing methods are fairly sophisticated. There are private pimping parties. There are door-to-door sales. In one of these cases in Virginia, the trafficker had a couple of quote-unquote regular customers that he would take these young women and children to, but then he would literally knock on the doors of these motels and apartment buildings to try to find new customers. And also the specialized clientele, construction workers, day laborers, illegal immigrants, and then they're using the internet in quite sophisticated ways. Some of the gangs exclusively market on the internet and do all their arrangements with cell phones and GPS to find the private home or hotel or wherever. And but in every other aspect, then it is like the trafficking that we're familiar with the force, fraud, or coercion, and the the money all being paid to the trafficker, none of it finding its way to the young woman or child. I just took a couple of these cases and calculated what some of these gangs are making. This is a San Diego case where the young women and children were being asked to charge $50 to $250 per act, depending upon what the act was. They had to do at least 5 per night. So you do the math, 1,000, that can bring in as much as 1,000 per night, times 30 nights is $30,000 per month, roughly $360,000 per year per girl. If you have 10 girls in your whatever stable or ring or whatever, that's $3.6 million per year for one operation. It's huge business. Here is, I believe this was is a Virginia case. $50 per act per girl, 9 men per night on weekdays, which is about $450. 30 men per night on weekends or per day, which is $3,000, which turns into $3,400 per girl per week, $175,000 per girl per year, times 10 girls, $1.75 million, and this is from the testimony of the young girls, or the informational interviews from the young girls, but also from the traffickers themselves. So the nature and scope of the link between gangs and human trafficking is difficult to calculate. It's underground activity. We don't have any methodologies for measurement right now, and as one Justice Department official said, we know next to nothing about how gangs conduct these kind of activities. We know a lot about some of the other kinds of activities because there's been quite a bit of information gathered about gangs and gang activity, but there haven't been specific questions asked about prostitution, pimping, pandering, procuring, maintaining a brothel. I'm told that the motorcycle gangs have moved into buying the actual places where the the homes and hotels and motels where a lot of this activity takes place. And then they split with the street gangs. The street gangs do the actual trafficking, but we don't know. The main point is we don't know, and we need to know a lot more. I've put up here a comparative analysis of federal and state legislation. Those of you who are working on eradicating human trafficking know that we have the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000, and it's been reauthorized in 2003, 2005, 2008, and they're working on the reauthorization for 2011. It has a twofold purpose: to punish the perpetrators and to protect and assist the victims. And it has it was the 3 Ps, and then Secretary Clinton added partnership, a 4th P. And it's a very sophisticated piece of legislation, which I still think is a model for working on this. We were surprised to find that there is very little federal gang abatement and prevention legislation. There have been a lot of problems. There have been at least 24 bills on both the Senate and the House side that have been introduced. Dianne Feinstein has introduced in 2007 and I think in 2009 again a street gang abatement and prevention act, but it has been opposed by both on both sides, both conservatives and liberals. Conservatives are concerned about states' rights and that this is more a local and a state issue, and federal government should not be getting involved in this. Liberals have been concerned about privacy and freedom of association because gangs associate, and just to associate is not a crime. So it's the criminal activity that you want to get at. And so none of these bills have passed. They've all failed. There is a quite interesting law review article that sort of tracks the efforts and the ways in which these pieces of legislation have been introduced, and what the discussion and debate has been, and then that they've died in committee for the most part. So, but states have passed quite a few laws. So, and that is where the action is, basically. Most states now have some kind of, I think it's all states except Vermont, have some kind of legislation relating to gang activities. They've passed gang prevention laws. They've got enhanced penalties for gang-related criminal acts. They have public nuisance laws to try to address, gang gatherings that oftentimes have criminal activity associated with it. They're even beginning to utilize graffiti, laws against graffiti to try to contain gang activity. There's some new efforts to focus on schools, and particularly middle schools, and the upper reaches of the elementary school, where a lot of the recruitment is going on, and to try to fashion some kind of legislation or regulation about gang recruitment of both boys and girls. So that's worth looking at. There's been, in spite of the fact that there's been no federal gang legislation, there has been quite a bit of activity because there's been money available in the Appropriations Acts. And so quite a bit of money, somewhere between $50 million and $100 million has been spent each year to help states develop. This is the, I didn't click this quickly enough, but this is the summary of what states have done to address criminal gang activity. With the funds, the federal government has helped to set up gang targeting enforcement and coordination center regions, and I think there are 7 of them in the U.S. I'm not a gang expert, I'll say that. I can answer almost every question on human trafficking, but I'm really just learning about the efforts to prevent and criminal gang activity, and also to arrest and prosecute criminal gang activity. So if there's anybody on this webinar who is an expert, please chime in. I wanted to contrast that with the 42 law enforcement task forces that this was from one of the, I think this is the 2009 or 10 Justice Department report on human trafficking. So some of these may be closing down, but generally speaking, these federal task forces are generating all of the new human trafficking cases that we have. And so one of the first recommendations that I have, I don't even think I have it on here as part of my recommendations, but is to get those 2 pillars together and talking to each other, to get the the federal task forces on human trafficking and the regional centers and task forces that have arisen, and I think there are 200 of them in local jurisdictions around the United States, have a joint meeting, or at least put gang-related activity on the human trafficking task force agenda and put human trafficking on the gang task force agendas, and I think that will go a long way toward making that link and also educating law enforcement as to what to look for and how to address those human trafficking cases that are where there's street gang involvement, because I think there are some specific methods of operation, modus operandi, that take a specific kinds of programmatic activity to address them. So my 7 recommendations are draft and pass local anti-gang laws. I think the federal laws, there's a new 2011 federal law that's been introduced by Representative McInerney in California, but I don't know that it's going anywhere because of the concerns that have been raised time and time again. So the localities is where the action is. Each locality should have anti-gang laws and these laws should address human trafficking. And law enforcement should be trained to look for human trafficking as part of gang activity. And here's one way that one community has begun that effort. They have added human trafficking to the list of suspect activities in their local legislation. Stronger penalties for gang-related crimes have been proposed by San Diego lawmakers, and a bill sponsored by a San Diego lawmaker added pimping, pandering, and human trafficking to the list of crimes associated with street gangs. And these 33 offenses I can get to anybody who might want to see them, and this is the name of the bill, AB 918. Third recommendation, charge and prosecute all criminal activity of gangs, not just the egregious crimes. So yes, they may be being prosecuted for murder and extortion and witness tampering, but if they're running a prostitution ring, or if they're trafficking juveniles into prostitution, that charge needs to be in amongst all the other charges. It's just as egregious a crime. So to begin to look for it and to charge and prosecute for it. 4, obtain injunctions and restraining orders preventing criminal gang activity, including human trafficking. And San Francisco Visitation Valley has a kind of a model program. It's new, so we have to see how it works, and there may be some concerns about restraining orders of this sort. But again, it's at least an effort to address this. Other communities and localities are using gang property abatement laws, a civil lawsuit against a property owner where the property is being used by a gang, and we could use those if we can locate properties that are being utilized for prostitution, for sex trafficking. We can use these kinds of gang property abatement laws, as well as most states have state-generated laws on maintaining a brothel or running in Louisiana, it's running a bawdy house. The 6th recommendation is education and awareness, making the link between trafficking in persons and street gangs, and reaching boys and girls who are in danger of being recruited. At a very young age, the boys are as much victims as the girls. And one of my colleagues up in Newburgh, New York, where they've had a huge problem with gang activities. Several of the bigger gangs from New York have Manhattan have moved into Newburgh. New York, and she said, it's a crime to put a gun into the hands of an 11 or 12-year-old and then go out and tell him, go and commit this crime. We are not adequately addressing the fact that once these young kids have been recruited and once they've been turned, if you will, and have committed crimes or have been forced into prostitution, it's very, very difficult then to get them back out and into mainstream society again. They see their lives as having been ruined or changed forever. And one of the girls who was trafficked into prostitution at the age of 13 in Virginia said, well, after this happened to me, I was like, why do I care? I'm damaged goods now, Why should I even bother trying to make a life for myself? I can't. I'm done for. So we need to reach these kids before this happens. This is the 2011 bill cited as the National Safe Street Gang Crime Prevention Act, and the representative is calling for a database, and not to go into too much of this, but the databases on gang activity are also very controversial, and there's a great paper that outlines the debate on it called "The Gangs All Here, Evaluating the Need for a National Gang Database." But the truth is, whatever you call it, we need more information on this problem, and particularly on the link between criminal street gangs and human trafficking. And so however we do it, we need to be gathering information. We need the research that's going to help us to understand the problem better so that we can design better programs that are targeted or tailored to this part of the human trafficking program. I just pulled up a couple of community responses that are fairly new that are going on to try to reach what I call the concentric circle of concern. So to try to reach kids who are being recruited, their parents and families, their teachers, their community leaders, their church leaders or synagogues and mosque leaders, whoever, to try to get the word out about this. So this is an set of anti-gang billboards that were unveiled in San Jose, California in 2009. Gangs have a special place for your kids, and then shows the graveyard. It was a year-long campaign, and I think it's fairly effective. We need a lot more of those to, sort of shine the spotlight, uncover, pull the rock up and shine the spotlight on this activity. This is I believe this is a Canadian awareness campaign, or maybe it's Seattle, but it challenged students in grades 8 to 12 to make a video, like a 1 to 3 minute video about gangs that would be sort of peer-to-peer social marketing campaign. And so another creative way to try to get kids educated and then involved. This is a new program to reach parents, and I think it's in San Diego, parents of first offender gang members. It's kind of like the John School for prostitution offenders, but it's for the parents of gang offenders for the first time they've been arrested, to try to help them understand what their sons or daughters have become involved in, and to get them involved in hopefully in prevention of further gang activity. Here's a Calgary, Canada campaign, and I put the website here because there were actually about 10 of these very short videos that are really good. Gang Life is a Dead End, Get a Life, and each one is a little bit different, and so they're examples of what can be done. The Canadians are ahead of us on this. The Canadians are also seizing gang assets like this I think it's a Hummer, but whatever it is, a Jeep or a Hummer, and then turning it around. They're reverse engineering. So it was a Hummer that was a gang mobile, and now it's an anti-gang mobile, and they go from school to school using this and to help educate kids about gangs. And I would add, that we need to have we need to have fairly explicit information about sex trafficking and human trafficking as we're talking about gang activity. And this one I loved also. They are seizing the pit bulls that the gangs were training to fight, and rescuing them and turning them into dogs against gangs. And they go into the schools with them, and the dogs have little either collars or a little outfit that they wear that says, I was a gang member and I've been rescued. Anyway, this is as much as I have right now, and I did want to leave enough time for some Q&A. So if there are any questions at all, please feel free, and let's talk about next steps.
Well, Laura, I know you mentioned earlier that you're not a gang expert, but we do have a question about whether or not there's any evidence of cases of MS-13 moving east, or operating in the eastern United States, which I think you were talking about. So I guess we're in the mid-Atlantic states with Maryland, Virginia, and so forth, but anywhere else kind of on the eastern seaboard?
Absolutely. Yes, I believe they are up in the Northeast, and I believe they're down in southern too. And that's something that that's information that I can easily get. And again, I think this is the kind of, now the map that I had up earlier, I don't know if I can get back there very well. This is going forward instead of backwards. But the map that I had up earlier, oh dear, Lisa, I don't seem to know how to go back.
Well, can you, there you go.
Yeah. But
you could just hit your back arrow several times.
Yeah.
It might take a while.
Yeah, that's okay. I was going to get back to this map, and you'll see that what the Justice Department has done is just show the arrests here, but it doesn't say which gangs and arrested for what, and so it at least gives you some idea of gang activity in various cities. But we need, it would be great if we could click on this and find in Boston these 69 arrests, which gangs were they and what were they being arrested for. And I think that would help a lot. And we need the same thing with human trafficking too.
Okay, well, another question, kind of I think along these lines, would be, can there be created on the internet a gang registry comparable to the sex offender registry, or a John registry like there is a sex offender registry?
It's a great question, and I think that the problem, as I've been reading about this, is that the way that information has been being collected on gangs until recently, there are two basic models. One is a kind of an information model in which there is kind of individual documentation on people who are known or suspected to be in a gang. And California, some of the cities in California are using this, and they take police officers at the beat level, and they have them just watch and note what they think of as gang involvement or gang activity. The problem with that is if you haven't done anything wrong where you are, where there's been an arrest, a charge, a conviction, a prosecution, and a conviction, this gets scarily into invasion of privacy, freedom of association, some of our constitutional rights, and so that's been the debate that has held this up. The other method is an incident-based documentation in which, if there were an arrest, a prosecution, and a conviction, then you would be on much firmer ground to, to document these kinds of activities. And that is, to a certain extent, what I'm doing with the case law database. I'm not doing it for all gang activity. I'm only doing it for human trafficking and related activities, and that's how we found this connection between street gangs and human trafficking. But the
Laura,
point is, yeah.
One of our participants has commented in that there are gang databases out there, but they're on the local and state levels, but that there are databases out there. So that's interesting.
Yes, there's a gang incident tracking system in Orange County. There are, and that's what I was starting to explain. That
there are
various methods of, that's okay. There are various methods of collecting this data, and various types of gang databases, and whether or not they're interacting together, and whether or not they're available to to everybody or just to law enforcement, and whether they can be shared nationally or not. I mean, all of this is under discussion right now. But yes, whoever it is absolutely right, and I would recommend this paper, The Gangs All Here, which does go over, before she evaluates the need for a national criminal gang database, she goes over the databases that that are available, or that that are in existence right now.
Who's the author of that The Gangs All Here paper?
The author is Rebecca Rader Brown, and
is that something people can just like do a Google search and The Gangs All Here and the report will come up?
Yes, but one thing I'll do is I'll put up a list of the sources for instance, all the Department of Justice National Gang Threat Assessment Report, which is pretty thorough, and some of the other sources that I used as I was doing my research. I can put that up for people, and I'll include that this with it, including the link to the website.
So what we'll do, everyone, is, in addition, when we post the actual recording of this presentation, we'll also have in that vicinity the various reports and things that Laura has referred to that are supplementary to her presentation included. So please don't be emailing us asking it for it. We'll put it up along with her presentation, but that probably will be early October, so give us a few days. We're in a kind of busy period here, but we'll include that information about the DOJ gangs report, as well as the Gangs All Here, and anything else Laura thinks would be of help to people. And Laura, I'm getting people saying that there's presence of MS-13 in southern Florida, like in Palm Beach, Broward, Miami-Dade counties.
Yeah.
And let's see, someone else said they had evidence of MS-13 in Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, and the key is what types of activities are they involved in, and are they getting involved, as I believe they are, more and more in the sex trafficking rings, because they bring in a lot of money, and they're still, to a great extent, they're still a little bit under the radar for most communities. Communities are used to looking for, the drug trafficking and the weapons trafficking and witness tampering and some of the other, sort of assault and other kind of violent crimes that gangs do. But in these cases of the MS-13 in Virginia, these gangs were operating these prostitution rings, and they're really sex trafficking rings because they were children that they were trafficking, for over 2, 3, 4 years, and no one had noticed.
Mm.
So,
wow. All right, we have a rather pointed question here, but I think the end of your presentation actually kind of addressed this. But the question is, what does any of this do to address the root causes of both trafficking and gangs? It seems like the focus is solely on punishment and not at all on prevention. But I think your end of your presentation did talk about some of the efforts to combat gangs. But do you want to expand on that?
well, I do, and this is again, it's I think one of the reasons why the a number of the National Gang Abatement and Prevention Acts have not passed is that there's been a big debate about how much energy should be, how much of our focus should be on the arrest, prosecution, conviction on the law enforcement side, and how much should be on the prevention side, and what really works in terms of prevention. But I'm a great believer in education and in social marketing campaigns. I do believe that they work. They're slow, and they have to be done community to community, class by class, sector by sector. But they need to be done, and so I think that educating at all levels, and I have in my law review paper, I have this concentric circle of concern where you start with the kids themselves, who are the targets of the gang recruitment, and their friends, and then families, and schools, and the community leaders, and so on. Education campaigns targeted or tailored to the kind of gang activity and the types of gangs that are prevalent in that neighborhood. And this is why you can't have a cookie-cutter approach. Just like we found in human trafficking, you can't have a cookie-cutter approach. We, in the State Department, made the mistake of, we had a fabulous brochure that said, "Be safe, don't be sorry," which we distributed in Ukraine in the early, I'd say 2001, 2002, 2003, warning young girls of the problems with allowing oneself to be lured abroad without knowing what the job was that you were being offered, and it worked there, and it had a young Ukrainian girl on it. Well, then somebody got the idea, let's just take this and we'll translate it into 7 different languages, and we'll have it in Thailand, and we'll have it down in South Africa, and we'll have it in South America, and it even had the same picture on the front, and of course it didn't work. So all of these campaigns, these educational campaigns and other campaigns, have to be tailored to the particularized problems in the community. And here you've got the conjunction of the 2 problems: the street gang activity and the human trafficking.
Yes,
but
interesting.
I believe that is one way to address some of the root causes. I say there's a triangle of root causes, just like I say there's a triangle of activity. Poverty is one root cause, but greed is another root cause, and exploitation is another root cause, and that corresponds to my triangle of economic activity: supply, demand, and distribution. So you have to address all sides of the triangle.
Another question we have says, I'm aware of one case in which a Somali gang trafficked girls in Minneapolis and Columbus, Ohio. Do you have any information about Somali gangs and trafficking that you might share? Thank you.
I do. And in fact, I couldn't give a lot of detail, but in the law review piece that I am just about finished with, there's a lot more detail on the specific kinds of cases, and I think we do cover the Somali gangs, and talk about their growing, the Somali mafia, and there's one other Somali gang that has been active in Minnesota. And I think in other places where there are Somali settlements, you're going to find the same type of thing. I may be, by the time you do get this, the webinar up, I may have completed this law review article, and it could go up, and it outlines that case among others. So yes, I'm aware of it.
Great. Okay. And then do you know if there are gangs in the state of Oregon?
I do, but I don't. Again, what really needs to be done is I need to take these 200 cases and look at all of the places. If they're asking whether there's gang activity, I believe there's gang activity in almost every state in the United States. But have we uncovered gang involvement in human trafficking in every state? I don't believe so yet.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think you addressed this, and some people were joined the presentation a bit late, and so here's the question: are the gang units of law enforcement working with the various human trafficking task forces?
I think,
yeah.
I think the answer is no.
Mm-hmm.
At the first presentation that the roundtable that the Global Centurion hosted, there were some members, some of the staffers from the Department of Justice, from the Office of Victims of Crime, and some of the other agencies, the divisions were there. And I assume that they have, gone back, and I hope that eventually, if not, I mean, that sooner rather than later, there will be some way of bringing the two task forces together. I have a list of the 200 task forces in the U.S., of the gang task forces, and we have that map of the 40 or so human trafficking task forces. So it wouldn't be hard to overlay those two, and at least make the suggestion that in the localities where there are task forces for each, that they begin talking to one another. And I had suggested that the first order of business would be just to put human trafficking on the gang task force agendas, and to put gang activity, criminal gang activity, on the human trafficking task forces agendas, because they meet regularly, and they're both multi-agency task forces. So in other words, they're not just law enforcement; they involve community organizations, NGOs from various different sectors, and so this could be eye-opening for both sets of task forces.
The list of 200 gang task forces, is that something that we could make available as supporting documentation that we'll be posting in October?
Yes, we can.
Okay.
And I think it's up on the FBI site, but yes, I'll get it, and I can put it as a supporting. And I'm making a note of the kinds of things that would be of interest to people.
Okay. One last question. Are there any good resources for prevention education regarding gangs, or for human trafficking in schools?
There are a lot of resources that have been developed for gang education. Again, I am not the expert on this. There may be somebody listening who can help with this. I assume that there are people who are have gang expertise that could help with this. I know that on the human trafficking side, there is very little that's tailored to the middle school or early high school, and even 6th grade, 5th and 6th grade in elementary school, which is where these kids are coming. They're being exposed to this on the streets, but we can't get it into the schools because of the nature of the material. And I was told by a couple of our NGOs here in the DC area that are attempting to get into the schools that when they seek to speak frankly about these problems, the PTA and the and probably parents too are concerned about about the the kind of materials that are being presented. So it's a difficult, it's a very difficult problem, but I think one we need to tackle. And there are ways to do it. What Global Centurion's been working on is a middle school curriculum that, in an upbeat way, introduces labor trafficking and then also sex trafficking, but does it with a series of interactive activities, games, ways that will catch kids' attention. Projects, making a quilt, or that kind of thing that will allow the child to be interactive, will touch on the issue enough so that if there's a problem, the child will come forward. I can't tell you how many times I've been in colleges and I speak and I will tell the story of a young girl who's been trafficked, and young women will come up to me afterwards and say, this happened to me, or this happened to my best friend, or this, and they need an opening, an opportunity of somebody who believes them a safe place to be able to come forward, and we aren't making that space, and that's what needs to happen.
We do have another comment here. Let's see. Local police are hesitant to acknowledge gang activity in certain city neighborhoods despite evidence presented, like gang tags, etc., in order to prevent alarm. But this prevents citizens from becoming aware of this issue and working on addressing it. Do you have recommendations on how to bring this issue to light?
Oh, well, this builds on what we were just discussing.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it took us a good 4 years to bring human trafficking and particularly sex trafficking to the fore. When we first started this work, drafting the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, Senator Brownback and Senator Wellstone had trouble convincing their fellow senators that this was really something that was happening. Hard to believe now, through a bluff. But it took testimony of victims, first-person stories, law enforcement officers. It took a series of hearings and briefings and bigger and smaller kinds of gatherings to begin to make the harm visible. And that's, I think, the problem that we have right now, is making the harm visible. And I think this person is right, because we in Fairfax, we have this, 3 or 4 of the cases, the MS-13 cases, are cases in Fairfax, Virginia, where middle schoolers were recruited. Fairfax, Virginia, of all places, we think it's, like it's a wealthy suburb, and it's here. And so denial doesn't help, and yet that's what's happening. Is everybody's in denial. Nobody wants to talk about it. Everybody wants to turn the other way because it's ugly. So it's just a matter of keeping at it, in my opinion. The first-person stories are important. Finding the right set of materials and curriculum speakers to bring in and to engage people, and going sector by sector, I think, is important too. The education sector, the community leaders, religious leaders, and so on and so forth. That would be my suggestion.
Wow, and here's an interesting comment. We have evidence of closed-circuit brothels here in Central Ohio for Latino communities only. Some are gang-related. You are actually given a business card at a taco cart, for instance, that would have a small symbol on it to indicate there is a connection to a brothel. And, of course, there's also a phone number. And only the Latinos who are in the gang would know what the symbol means. And this was just, they say they just share this to say how clever the gangs are getting.
Absolutely, and I think Polaris Project has done some work on this, but again, it's just, we're just, scratching the surface. We're in the foothills of consciousness about how this works. I know that when I went to Cambodia and we were out in doing the kind of a midnight tour in the equivalent of the red light district, and I kept noticing that there were these weird neon pink like almost like a flower or something, way inside a room, and apparently anywhere there was this pink neon flower, and a door open, at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, those were the places that the back rooms had the brothels. And the people who were looking for them knew, and everybody else just thought, wow, that's a weird pink neon flower. So absolutely, that is happening, and that is why I say we need to, first and foremost, we need more research and more understanding of the modus operandi of each of these, and it's going to be different in every community and with every type of gang. But we need to find out what it is, document it, and then we'll be able to build programs to address it.
Okay, well, we have talked quite a while now, and we've gone through a lot of questions. So, Laura, I want to thank you so much for your time and for sharing this and really bringing to our attention this link between human trafficking and street gangs. And obviously, this is an area where all of us who've been working on human trafficking can begin to be turning some of our attention. And likewise, those of us who've been involved in anti-gang work can also, they can likewise turn to human trafficking and begin to brush up on that and begin to study the connections. And clearly there's so many different directions of area of work where we could all make a significant contribution to preventing this problem, and whether it's in schools and, in different law enforcement and policy efforts in our local communities. So thank you so much for bringing this to our attention and for all your time today. And also, just as a reminder, I know we've said this a few times, but we will be posting this presentation as a recording that you'll be able to access on the Salvation Army website. We'll be doing that in October. And when we do that, we will also post a list of the supplementary materials that Dr. Lederer has referred to in her presentation today. So if you're wanting to track down some of the papers and reports that she's talked about, you can get them then. So again, thank you, Laura, and thank you to our audience. We really appreciate your attention and how you've stayed with us in this last hour and a half. I know that can be a little bit hard when there's so many competing things going on at the office. So we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us and to listen to this presentation. So thank you, everyone, and stay tuned to our listserv. We will hopefully be having another webinar in the not-too-distant future. This is just today's webinar is another in the series of the Initiative Against Sexual Trafficking webinar series, which we host as an opportunity to help educate and equip the broader anti-trafficking community in many different areas. So, and certainly today's presentation was really a creme de la creme. So thank you so much, Laura. And everyone have a great afternoon. Any closing comment, Laura, before we go?
No, I was able to pull up a couple of these requested pieces of information. So I will attach to the PowerPoint, I'll attach a list of sources, and then people will be able to click on them and get straight to them.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And have a great afternoon, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye now.